Get ready to dive into a world where empires stand on the brink of war and terrible monsters tear at the fragile borderlands of men. The Adventurer-Conqueror King System Imperial Imprint, or as we like to call it, Acts 2, is now live on Kickstarter. Acts 2 is the new edition of the acclaimed best-selling fantasy role-playing game. You'll find everything you need to enjoy epic fantasy campaigns with a sweeping scope. Whether you want to crawl through dungeons, experiment with alchemy, crossbreed monsters, run a merchant emporium, raise an undead legion, or even conquer an empire, Acts 2 supports your playstyle. Acts 2 integrates experience point mechanics, making campaign activities a seamless part of the core gameplay loop. Your character levels up in new and exciting ways each time you play, adding massive replayability to each of your adventures. Acts 2 offers 18 character classes, 378 spells, new combat mechanics, and so much more. Support Acts 2 on Kickstarter today.
Okay, here's how Miro works. See, it's amazing.
What's everyone doing at David's desk?
Ever since marketing started using Miro's collaborative online whiteboard, he thinks all our other teams should sign up.
Why?
He says Miro's making his meetings disappear. And if every team gets on it, that means even less meetings. They're using Miro for brainstorms, mind maps, customer research.
So could we use Miro instead of having another 100 meetings for every round of feedback?
Yep. You can comment, react to ideas, even leave a recording on the board.
And what about presentations?
There are Miro templates for that.
How do you know so much about Miro?
I've actually been using it all along. I just used a Miro board to plan the best vacation.
Okay, I'm on board.
See how Miro users save up to 80 hours every year by meeting less and doing more. Get on board at Miro.com with 3 boards free forever. That's MIRO.com.
How powerful is the Cox network? So powerful that one day the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away.
Connecting to remote operating room.
Giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox network. With gig speeds everywhere, it's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply.
Hello Patreon, and welcome to the first ever Dear Dungeon Daddy. We're so excited to offer up some advice and answer your questions. We've been polling the Noctoprone Discord for a few weeks and have been blown away at the response. Special thanks to Ograd, Glenn, Carter, Austin, and everyone else who sent in submissions. We have a lot to get through, so let's get started. My name's Alec, and I'll be polling our Master Dungeon Daddies today. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and give us a little background into your DM experience before we start? Cade, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I'm Cade. I usually am the host for the Noctoprone podcast. I'm the deer of the Dear Dungeon Daddy. Just kidding. I've been DMing for the past 5 years, and I would consider myself a rule of cool DM. However, I have been swayed other ways every so often. Is there anything else you want? I am 5'10". I went.
My address.
Mason, you're up.
Yeah, my name is Mason. I've been DMing for just over 6 years, I think. Ever since I graduated high school. I am very much I guess contrary to Cade's rule of cool, I do like rule of cool, but I'm very much a rules lawyer. DM, in where a lot of the rules live in my mind rent-free, and it's just how the game's played.
It's honestly one of my favorite things about us being at the same table together is me being like, I don't know how this works, and you being like, I do, and it's like, okay.
Well, I know from experience, Cade's thoughts on DMing are, I'm not sure how this works. Here's the point of inspiration.
Good job confusing me.
Good job. I'm not really sure what to do about this, so here's this, and let's move forward.
Exactly.
Well, I think it'll be good having 2 different types of DMs on this, so let's move forward. We've got a few questions, longer questions asking for some advice from the Dungeon Daddies, and then we have questions for each of you specifically, so we'll get on to the first advice question. Dear Dungeon Daddies, a few of the players asked an NPC to tell them some backstory of the world. So, as I was explaining some history to these players, I noticed the other players laughing and talking in a small group. They kept looking at me and laughing and writing stuff down. one player seemed to be looking stuff up on his phone. I got very nervous and asked them what they are doing. They told me they are planning on making a fantasy-style Death Star, something they called the Dark Moon, nicknamed the Dark Freckle. Their plan was to have the Artificer, a few NPC blacksmiths, and a mega-powerful wizard they recently befriended work together to get materials, cast specific spells, and make a Death Star. They wanted to combine magic, items, logic, and luck to make a death weapon. Their plan was to use this to threaten the leaders of the world into submission, so they could be basically god kings. They went on a few off-story quests for materials and eventually made their way to the wizards in an attempt to persuade him into joining. I asked the guy who was leading the plan to roll an intimidation check. He got a nat 20. I ended the session with them and the wizard running off to build and told them to give me a week to figure out what to do next and we could continue later. Please help, I do not know what to do. What are your guys' thoughts? Let's start with Mason.
I was going to say we should start with Mason because this seems like a very rule of cool type thing that I'm like, I want to know what Mason thinks.
I think number one, your players are very creative, and I think that you shouldn't necessarily punish that. Part of your job as a DM is to make the game as fun for your players as possible, as well as yourself. Like, you're supposed to be included in that. But I think that for this, you can easily lean into it. Make gathering materials and stuff like that part of the challenge. They have to face difficult monsters or something like that in order to gather some of these precious materials. You could also put barricades in their way, such as local governments or perhaps even the gods finding out about their plan and wanting to stop such a thing from coming to fruition, like most villain stories happen. And I'm not saying your players want to be villains, but it kind of sounds like it.
A little bit.
Yeah. So, but I say lean into it. This is what your players want to do. It's your job as a DM to figure out how you're going to make it fun, how you're going to make it work. And the end of the campaign could be either them achieving their goals and the world has changed forever, or it could be them failing along their way and learning their lesson. Both of them could be satisfactory endings. It's just how the roles go and how you decide to play it out. But I do think that leaning into it is probably going to be your best course of action, because I don't know, trying to convince the players to do something when it's not something they want to do just doesn't make D&D fun.
I like it. Cade, what are your thoughts?
I am also in the camp of leaning into it. However, I think I would lean so far as to make the players in this situation successful. Allow them, say they go talk to the leaders of the world and say, hey, we're going to blow up the world unless you give us, this god ship, basically. Okay, the leaders refuse you. You decide to blow up the world. What other world are you going to? There's no other inhabitable worlds. Yeah, you can live on the Death Star. Where are you getting your food? How long can you survive on this Death Star or for the Dark Freckle without resources from another planet or another world? And then you could have a mini campaign almost inside of the Dark Freckle where they're just trying to kind of figure out because I think where your players are kind of coming from is a space of wanting to see that they have change in the story, wanting to be able to, in a way, treat your game like it's somewhat like Grand Theft Auto, where it's I can do whatever I want, and if I have those choices, there's probably not going to be any consequences. But then you as a DM have to kind of come up on the fly of okay, what are those consequences? And if you get those consequences in front of them and they realize, wow, I bit off more than I could chew, you almost get to enjoy the storyline that you've created together, where you're both having to kind of come up with on the fly certain storylines that you wouldn't necessarily have told had this story not been brought up in the first place.
Yeah, I will say I'm surprised. I was pretty sure Cade would say, yeah, do it. That sounds great. But I thought Mason would be well, this is going to be super difficult, which you kind of did.
Yeah, you can make it because that's the thing, is building a space station even in real life is going to, even if you had magic, how are you going to survive out in space? How are you going to get it up in the air? There's multiple different challenges you can present to them, but challenges make a story. So Like, you're leaning into what your players are wanting to do while not just giving them a bunch of power, kind of thing.
I like it. Well, thanks to Carter for that question. I will say to Carter, I think the nickname of the Dark Freckle that your party has nicknamed it is awesome. I think that's an awesome nickname.
They might want to get it checked out, though, in their next doctor's visit.
You want to make sure the dermatologist is cool with the freckle. It's really dark.
But even too, like, sorry, last thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just like my DM brain, like, even if they succeed or fail either way, you can always have a follow-up campaign in the same world and have it be a monument in the air, like in space, known as the Dark Moon or something like that. That's like, maybe it got destroyed by a god. Maybe they were successful, but they died and it's just been left there in abandonment. Like, there's lots of ways you can move past it. Even if they achieve their goal in this campaign and you move on to the next, you can still make a lot of joy from their creation and their idea, even in future campaigns.
Nice. Sorry. I like it. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one comes from Austin. Dear Dungeon Daddies, I was running a game recently with a new group and had a player who was honestly just obnoxious. He was constantly interrupting me as I presented the world and always had to be the center of attention. I could tell it was bothering other players as well. I threw a puzzle at the party and things went south very fast. There was a piano in the room they entered and a dead human sitting at the bench. His hand was on the piano keys and nothing was left but the skeleton of his hand, but the rest of his body was intact. The piano was cursed with basically a blight spell, and playing it sucked the vitality out of you until nothing but skeleton was left. So back to this obnoxious player. As I'm describing the piano and the body sitting at it, he interrupts me and walks over to it and puts his head directly on the keys. I don't think I was acting rashly, but it killed his character. I killed his character. The way I saw it, the curse would remove all the skin and tissue from his head, just like it would have their hand. So basically his brain was turned to ash. I don't even need to waste time explaining to you guys what happened next, but my question is, was I in the wrong? Was I just punishing this guy for being a bad player, or did he deserve it? Let's start with Cade this time.
Oh, man.
I honestly love this submission, by the way.
I think it's great.
It's awesome.
It's very fun. However, very sad, because going forward...
ending in a player death is always a bummer. But again, what do you think?
I don't think you were in the wrong in this situation. However, I might have brought up prior, as a person who is conflict avoidant to a fault, this is way easier said than done, but having a conversation with that player and being like, hey, just so you know, like, these are the actions that you've been doing lately, and these are kind of like the consequences of like the table's attitude as a consequence to these actions. And if this is the way you would wish to continue to play, maybe this isn't like the best campaign for you to be in. Because I think that the problem is getting to the point where everyone is, or at least assuming everyone is annoyed with this player at the table, and then it comes to this point where they do something obnoxious and like kind of like overstep you as a DM to interact with the puzzle before you can fully explain it, and then have that consequence. I mean, it's a great consequence. The problem, I think, is that player is going to walk away from that table feeling like everyone hates them. Mm-hmm. Like, because nobody's going to stand up for them at that point, right? Because they're like, the whole table's been assumedly annoyed with this one player, and so to have them die and then for them assumedly to say like, well, that's unfair, I had no way of knowing, even though they could have rolled Arcana, Insight, etc. Hindsight's 20/20 though. So as a person who has played characters who try to be a little more head first into conflict, it is hard to say like, well, you're going to be punished. But also I am at fault for, if somebody does something against my puzzle, I will go down to the grave with like, you can't do X in this puzzle. And if the player continues to do X in the puzzle, it's like, straight up said, you can't do X in this puzzle. Now you continuing to do it, like, the gloves are coming off at that point. So I don't think you were in the wrong in this point. However, it's a very difficult, tricky situation to be in, and it might have helped to pull the player aside prior to this, because then had they known like these are kind of how your actions are affecting the table, and then had died, like after like that issue had hopefully been resolved, I think they would have been a little bit more at peace with their character's death. However, I don't know if Austin had a player blowout after this, but it might have caused a fight, in my opinion.
I might just have to reach back out and say, like, okay, like what
we
happened?
Need follow-ups.
I'm very curious.
So,
I would
hey,
imagine
Austin,
it was
if you're listening
extreme.
to this, let us know. We want to know what happened.
I have an idea. Probably yelling.
Probably yelling.
Some disagreement.
I know how much time I put into preparing characters, even one-shot characters. And if one of them were to die, I would
Straight
be pretty,
out.
you know, you'd be pretty upset. Fairly.
Yeah.
So, anything else, Cade?
I agree. Like, you put a lot of time into characters, and so it's just hard to feel like they get ripped away for... Puzzles are hard for that reason. Like, if there's a death possibility in a puzzle, that is a hard thing to throw at your characters, because it almost feels like you're attacking the player's intelligence rather than the character's intelligence if they die.
That's fair. I didn't think about it like that. Well, Mason, what do you think?
I will actually. I am of the opinion that they were potentially a little bit too harsh in this situation. I mean, I would have had the blight spell take effect, and if the amount of damage that the blight spell had was enough to kill them, yes. But I think that where I feel like you went a little overboard was having, when they laid their head on it, it instantly killed them.
It should have been like a saving throw or something.
Yeah, it should have been a saving throw as per the Blight's rules. If the damage was enough to kill them, I think that's a great way to flavor it. But if not, I feel like that was a little bit of overkill on your part, which I understand being frustrated as a DM and making like some kind of rash actions. So I'm not necessarily blaming you for that, but when you're a DM, you write the rules for the game. If the players break the rules, you enforce whatever boundaries you have, but you don't want to make them harsher or more punishing just because they broke it in a way that you didn't approve of, or something like that. That's where you go from being a DM to being more of a dictator, which I'm not trying to be too harsh on whoever submitted this question, but it's a fine line. I think anyone who's DM'd before knows like the ability to let the power maybe get a little bit to your head, make a decision that may not have been the best in the situation, but you can rectify it always. Like, it is your world as well as the player's world, and you can make changes to better suit that. As for the player issue, I think that's something that you need to address just outside of the game completely, because I do think that by having consequences that show like, hey, goofing off isn't a great idea, but without straight up killing your players would be a great way of like showing like, hey, there are consequences for your actions. Maybe don't do things so frivolously. But another way is outside the game, just confronting the player. And it doesn't have to be like a dispute in any way, but just letting them know like, this is the way that you've been acting, similar to what Cade was saying. These are the consequences it's had on the game. I get the feeling that like, I don't like this. I get the feeling that other players don't like this. Like, what can we do to still make it sure you're having fun at our game, but that other people get their time to have the spotlight as well? If they're a reasonable person, they'll come to an agreement with you. If they are not, maybe they're not the best suited for the game. That happens frequently, and you just gotta let them know, like, sorry, move on, and that's about it. You wouldn't play sports with someone who is violent, or like video games with someone who ruined your experience of doing that. Why would you play D&D with someone who's going to ruin yours and everyone else's experience of the game? You just got to be the tougher person at that point. But those situations are never fun. I wish you good luck in whatever you decide or have decided to do.
Yeah.
Well, this is a follow-up question from me, just listening to your responses. So, well, specifically, Mason, your thought is, and even Kate too, have a discussion with this player, right? Say this is a one-shot, first time you've played with this player. Would you interrupt a game if you had a disruptive player and speak with them one-on-one in mid-one-shot? I mean, this can be simple yes or no.
Personally, no. I don't think that confronting people in front of their peers or their friends is a good way of doing it. At that point, they let things like ego and the way that they're viewed by the group get in the way of a rational discussion. I think it's better to pull them away one-on-one, have this situation, like have this conversation, let them know that it doesn't like this is an issue we're overcoming rather than I hate you for this type of situation. And most reasonable people are going to come to an agreement with you.
So basically finish the game, no major consequences, talk to them before the next game.
Yeah, I mean, if it's really bad and it's ruining the game actively, maybe just like maybe shoot them a text or something like that. But if it's something that you can deal with, if it's just annoying and you can get through it and then fix it for next game, do it. Like it'll suck for a little bit, but it's going to be worth it for overall friendship and relationships later on.
Which is very important to think about, like assuming this person's your friend, you don't want to burn that bridge.
Yeah.
I personally would stop the game mid-session. However, I wouldn't be like, hey, cut it out, because
separate them almost.
I would legitimately say like, hey, let's take like a bathroom break, let's get some snacks downstairs, and then I would at that point ask that person to stay behind. And if they were embarrassed by that, I could be like, I just want to talk to you about like your character in this coming scene and get your feel about something that's going on. In that way, make it so that the players don't feel like, and even in that case, like potentially have a one-on-one sit down with every other character to make them feel a little less targeted. I mean, that's hard to, in the perfect world where you have all the time in the world and this one shot can run well into however late you want it to. I think that for me, what I would do is pause, have a one-on-one conversation with this person at the table right then, because if it's a one shot, like you said, that's potentially the only game that you're going to play in this campaign. And I, as a DM, feel guilty for the other characters if this is their only experience with D&D, or
maybe with D&D with you as their DM.
Exactly. I don't want them to have a sour taste in their mouth over somebody else's actions at my table, and I would much rather cut the head off of the problem right in the moment and kind of pause it. Luckily, we've never had this issue in a podcast, and you guys would know that because I've never been like, everyone go downstairs and take a snack.
I don't know. There was an episode you said, hey, everybody stay downstairs. I'm going to just take Marissa upstairs.
Oh, right. No, but that was because she had evil vision.
She's a warlock. That's just different.
I know. All right. Well, we're going to move on to the next question. Dear Dungeon Daddies, I am currently in a game where one of the players would fudge his dice a lot, like a lot. We all politely told him that we know, and now he gets angry when he rolls low, like visibly angry to the point he throws the dice at the table as hard as he can when he's been rolling low, to the point our DM has had to stop the game and tell him if he can't respect the dice and the table, then he was going to have to not play anymore. How would you handle this situation? We'll start with Kate this time.
Man, I would have a really hard time. I mean, my table's pretty sturdy, so I wouldn't have a hard time about the table, but it would be really hard for me. Anger is just a really hard emotion to be able to bring down in a person, especially at a D&D table where it's a game. And I am, as a person who has terrible dice luck every so often, I go through bouts of like never rolling over a 10 in personal sessions. And even sometimes in podcast, you might notice that there's been sessions where I will just like roll terribly and just have to suck it up basically, because it's like, well, this is what the dice are going with today. And I know, like that, you want to feel like the hero in the story. You want to feel like your actions matter, and you want to feel like you're Frodo and not necessarily Gandalf, because Gandalf is an amazing character who makes appearances every so often, but their actions don't necessarily inhibit the story as much as Frodo, the main character. Wanting to be the main character of your story is such a hard thing to come to terms with when you're a new D&D player, is figuring out that like sometimes it's not about you as a player, and sometimes it's about the table's experience. Personally, I mean, I said it in the last question, I would pull this player aside, which sounds like they kind of did, saying like, hey, if you can't respect my table, if you can't respect the players at this table, like, maybe this isn't the greatest game for you. But, you know, I would honestly probably pull them aside more so to say, failing is one of the coolest parts of D&D. Having a low roll of like a 1 or a 2, you get to, like, that is like the killing blow that you get to narrate with your nat 20 is just as funny rolling a nat 2 against a bad guy and missing entirely. Like, being able to say, I whiff because the sun was in my eyes, or like, I noticed that the big bad evil guy had the most gorgeous nail polish, and so I like hold my sword over him at the last second because I couldn't go through with it, seeing that immaculate pedicure, you know, like, or whatever you end up going with. Like, that is your space to take the game and do whatever you want with it. A middle roll, like a 13, if a 13 misses, it's like, dang it, well, I tried. But like, having that lower roll, honestly, to me, makes the game, the low rolls are more important to me than the nat 20s. Even though, as you probably know as a listener of the Knocked Prone podcast, I reward natural 20s with, like, whenever they are rolled, combat or out of combat, they are successes, but they are more than just successes. They are perks. And natural 1s in campaign 1, I had as kind of detriments. However, I've kind of rectified that now that we have players rolling multiple d20s per round in the second campaign. But having these low rolls, I feel like just explaining to that player that low rolls can be just as fun, I think would make a world of difference in their game.
Yep. I will add, as a player, I am not a DM. I have had a number of low rolls in the campaign 2 of Knocked Prone that have had huge and funny impacts. Like, Finch probably would never have been turned into a Drider had I not rolled a 1.
Like a 3-episode detour.
Yes,
just to go cure
multiple episode detour. The suckling would have never happened had I not rolled that roll. And you know what? It's funny. I think it adds to the story. No one's going to be perfect all the time. So I like them too. I'm with you.
And you wouldn't want it to be perfect, because if you rolled a nat 20 every single time,
no, it wouldn't be fun. It would not be fun anymore if everything was perfect.
Yeah, exactly. A way you can explain it to the player is like, how boring would life be if everything you tried, you just instantly succeeded at? You had no challenge. You had no, you know, like, that's, and I get this as a game, but like, part of D&D is being able to replicate life in a game and being able to live out just different situations or scenarios that are fantastical and that you'd never be able to actually experience in real life. But like Kate had said, like, without failure, you're not introducing fun into D&D. How many times in a show that you've watched or a story you've followed has the main character failed and had to have overcome that either later in the same fight, later in the same just story arc, like something like that, and then when they were able to actually do it later on, it was big. It was a character development, it was character growth, and it made the story that much better. In D&D, it's the same thing. Your characters, without their failures, are nothing. Like, their strengths don't seem nearly as spectacular. And so I think explaining that to the player, and just like letting them know that like heroes are everything, their flaws and all, and you are just embodying a hero at that moment. Another thing too is bringing to their attention that it's like, yes, you may want to be the star of the show, but the thing to remember is that with D&D, you're sharing the stage with 3 to 4 other people, maybe even more sometimes, maybe less, I don't know, your group. In any theater setting, you're just like, if you steal the spotlight at all times, you're just going to become an enemy of the people you're working with. People aren't going to like being around you. People aren't going to want to be in another show with you because they had their moment taken from them. And the same goes for D&D. You want to be courteous to other players to allow them to have their moments as well. Otherwise, it may as well just become the you show, and no one's going to want to play the game where it's all about your character and you as a person when you have 3 or 4 other people contributing to this story. So I do think that, sitting down with them, having a conversation of like just what you're doing is not okay to both me and the players. Cheating is not allowed in like any game. If I had friends that were cheating in games, like I would tell them straight out that they needed to stop or they needed to leave. Like the point of the game is to play it, not to win. If that fails, like so much of this stuff is just really just, and I don't know the age groups you're playing with. Like maybe if you guys are teenagers, maybe give them a little bit of slack. People go through crap. They have to learn social skills and stuff like that, just like everyone else. If you're adults and this is happening, having just a reasonable conversation with them should be what they need. And if they continue to break the rules after that, it's as simple as just saying, like, you don't think they're right for the party, you don't think they're right for the thing. If you want to be close friends with them, you can even mention that, like, maybe you think a solo session would be better suited for them, because then they can be the center of attention and the spotlight in the show without infringing on other people or characters. So there's lots of ways you can manage it, but talking to them is going to be your best option 9 out of 10 times.
I like the idea of talking to them, but also maybe offering a solo session where they can get that, almost just like get it out.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be the center of attention. I want to be the hero. Give them the chance to do that, and then maybe talk to them so then when they come back with the party, they can settle back into the role of it's not all about me.
Yeah, exactly.
As a person who has ran many solo one-on-one D&D sessions with Project Nora, with the first time that I really played one-on-one with Brooklyn and I way back when, was awesome. Like, that was super, super fun to be able to explore that as her character. But also I had a problem player who kind of was angry about not being the center of attention all the time. I ran a text campaign with them where I literally was like, hey, this table's obviously not meant for you because, like, you're not having a good time, and I can tell. And, like, because of your actions, other people at the table aren't having as great of a time as well. So, like, do you want to, like, if you want to play a one-on-one campaign, I can do that. And they were ecstatic about that. They wanted to be the main character. And so literally I just set up we texted back and forth. They would say, like, I want to do this and this. And then I'd say, roll me this. And I don't know if they were honest about their roles, because you can't really tell over a text chat. But at that point, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, at that point, you are influencing your own story. And so if you want to cheat in that way, you could. But like, it's at least if you're going to cheat in that situation, the only person it's affecting is you. And that's what I think is the biggest part that makes me sad about people cheating at the table, is just, it's taking the game not away from you, but it's taking the game away from the other players.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, thanks for joining in. From here on, we are going to be moving to Patreon only. We have like 10 plus more questions to answer. So we've only gotten through 3 now. So if you are interested in hearing the rest of this content of our Dear Dungeon Daddy episode, go on over to patreon.com/knocked, subscribe to the $5 tier, which is the Himbo Squad, and you'll be able to hear the rest of this content from here on forward.
How powerful is the Cox network? So powerful that one day the internet will let your doctor perform miracles from thousands of miles away.
Connecting to remote operating room.
Giving a whole new meaning to the term house call.
Operation complete.
The Cox network, with gig speeds everywhere. It's internet built for tomorrow, today. Cox, bringing us closer. In Cox serviceable areas, speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms apply. Other restrictions may apply.